All right, we are so pumped to welcome back to Theater in College Hoops, assistant coach for the 13th ranked Auburn Tigers, and most notably, most importantly, best friend of the program, Mike Burgomaster, back on the program. What's going on, Burgo?
Nothing much. Nothing much. Excited to be back. The podcast is doing big things. It's been awesome to follow along and hear all the different cool guests that you guys have had on, and things are good. Just in the early parts of conference play, which is going to be a grind, and we're in the thick of it right now.
We're very fortunate, Burgo, and you are actually the catalyst for the guests that we've had on. I'm being 100% serious because I think you were the first guest that we had on that's patrolled a sideline. And look at you now. Are you coming to me live from a new office that you got recently?
Same office that I've had. No windows in here. Not complaining, obviously. I love the fact that I have my own office, but yeah, no, same office. The TV's behind my head for some reason. I don't know. I don't know who the engineer was that designed that, but yeah, same office.
Well, the reason I asked that as well is because the last time we spoke with you and the first few times that you've been on the program, your title was director of ops, right? Or at least assistant director of ops, director of ops. But now, Burgo, you're an assistant coach. And I want to make sure people understand how amazing that is, what a trajectory it's been for you in terms of the steps and the places that you've stopped at. And I joke a little bit about the office because as you move up in the coaching ranks, that office is probably going to get a little bit bigger. And I have no doubt you're going to continue doing that. But Burgo, my first question, can you tell us about the transition from going from director of ops at Auburn and previous places to where you are right now as an assistant coach?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I think one of the best things that came from some of the rule changes in college basketball this offseason was they allowed college basketball programs to have two more staff members that could be on court coaches. So historically, right, you have your head coach, and then you've had three assistant coaches, and those are the guys that are on the road recruiting. Can instruct on the floor, all that sort of stuff. Everybody else, whether it was a director of ops or player development, everybody else has been considered support staff in the past, meaning you can coach the coaches essentially, right? Like you can't have actual instruction or be in drills and that sort of stuff. So they changed that this summer. And so I was fortunate enough to be one of the two people that Coach Pearl selected from our support staff, to be an on the court coach. And it's been awesome. I mean, I do what I love every single day, which is, coaching the game of basketball. Still definitely have my hands in a bunch of the operations stuff, just because we didn't add any new staff members. We just got more work essentially for our staff to have to figure it out. So yeah, and then really fortunate that Coach Pearl fought to have our titles changed to assistant coach, which for me is a huge deal. To be 29 years old and to be have a title of assistant coach in the SEC, which is in my opinion the best conference in college basketball. I still can't believe it, but I'm very fortunate to be doing what I love to do every day.
Look, it is amazing, and you should feel very proud of yourself. We've been fortunate and lucky enough to have not only coaches and players, but when I focus in on the coaches and the support staff, the assistant coaches, director of ops, they're very young guys. In your conference, Ben Gonzalez over at Georgia, who I think is doing a great job, and Mike White has a great team over there. Ruben Williams, he was over at Arkansas for a minute. He's now at Montana. It's really neat seeing guys in their mid to late 20s continue this trajectory of growth. Burgo, and I really appreciate you shedding light on some of that, what transpired over the summer in terms of more opportunities for coaches. I think a lot of us understand or have to understand some of the changes as it relates to the players. I didn't know that about the coaches. Do you know what was driving that rule change, or do you know any context behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been something that's been voted on the past 3 to 4 years, and it's been turned down for whatever reason. I think what really kind of pushed it over the edge was during COVID. There was a waiver that was passed that allowed support staff to sort of act like managers, and because prior to that, like, you're not even allowed to like rebound, what I'm saying, if you're a support staff, right? It's silly. Like, you have to stand outside the court, can't touch a ball and play. It's a very bizarre rule. But so they passed a waiver to allow support staff members to act as like managers and be in there and rebound and that sort of stuff. And then I think because they never really repealed that waiver. And I think people found that it was very beneficial to be able to, because with all the recruiting that we have to do, sometimes during the summertime, there's just not enough bodies from a staff member that can be on the court and like help with the player development and instruction and that sort of stuff. So I think, whether it was, the NABC, council or who, I don't know exactly who came together, finally decided to just pass this, but they saw that it was good for, the player development. It was good for the players at the end of the day, which is what this is all about. Just so that they have, more people to help them.
That's fascinating. I'm serious. Like, I had no idea. You learn something new every day. You think you got a beat on the transfer rule, and things are changing constantly in college basketball, and they're reported on. But I'm glad we had you on to tell me about this, Burgo. I'm curious to know now, because a large contingent of our listeners, me included, we got these corporate jobs, right? And so when you move within the same company to a higher role, there's usually an application process, or there's things you got to do in order to have your employer or your boss essentially tap you on the shoulder and say, yes, I want you to fulfill this role. Can you tell us what that process was like with you and Bruce Pearl? Like, why did Bruce Pearl choose you? And I am allowing you and encouraging you to kiss your own ass here. Why did you get this role?
Well, I think it goes back to and something that coach says all the time is anytime you have an opportunity to be a part of a basketball staff, you want to be as valuable as you possibly can. And that goes not just from the basketball side of thing, but like, something as simple as when I was a graduate assistant, right? It's like, trying to be the first person in and the last person to leave, trying to make sure that if I wasn't there that day, right, things just weren't going to run properly because I had my hand in so many different things, whether it was on the court, off the court, operations, making sure the guys are at class, and just trying to be as valuable as I possibly can and do as much as possible. I went from being a graduate assistant to getting an opportunity to be on the full-time staff, and I've kind of just used that same mindset. And it all came from something that Coach Pearl said is like, you just want to try to be as valuable as you possibly can in your role. Like, all right, who's making sure the bus is here on time? Oh, well, Burgo's doing that. Or, who prints the scouting report? Oh, Burgo's doing that. You know what I'm saying? And just making sure that you're responsible and doing things well in as many different areas as you possibly can. And so, like I said, went from being a graduate assistant to being on full-time staff, use that same mindset, and have just tried to keep learning and studying and staying on the cutting edge of, what's going on in the game of basketball, and I've just tried to be as valuable as I possibly can. And I think, I'm very appreciative of Coach Pearl, because I think he's recognized that in some areas. And, he is, he's amazing in the sense that he really does believe in promoting from within. I think that's not necessarily typical all around the country. And everybody had, they're not saying that one's right and one's wrong, but I think he really believes in rewarding the people that have paid their dues and been around for, some success to help them grow in their careers. And I'm fortunate that, he's had that mindset with me.
I'm glad you mentioned the success part, Burgo, because for those that don't know, you were at Miami as well prior to Auburn. And the Miami we know it as today, that was a culture that you helped build, you contributed to. There's no denying that there's a correlation between you on the bench and successful teams. You've been to a Final Four, obviously, with Auburn. You're rolling right now. And so the value you bring and the work that you bring is undeniable. So, Burgo, I'm going to go back to a little bit, rewind to what you said about how you still have your hands in some of the operational pots. Okay. It does sound as if you are a team player in the sense that you're not going to be like, hey, I got this assistant coach tag now. Whatever I was doing comes to a full screeching halt. Sounds like you're still doing some of that, but I am curious to know, how has your day-to-day and your role changed, Mike? Because like, what are some additional responsibilities that you have to do now that you didn't have to do previously?
Yeah. I mean, I think, first and foremost, it's being on the floor with the players, which is, when I go back to when I was a student manager at the University of Miami, that's what made me love this job to begin with, is just getting to spend the one-on-one time, with players, rebounding, getting to know each other, working hard together. So I'd say, the biggest change, there's two massive changes. One thing would be being on the floor throughout the day, whether it's someone just want to shoot free throws and just being down there and rebounding for them, or whether it's working with some of the posts and their one-on-one development, and then being able to be on the floor during practice is you have to prepare, like you know Coach Pearl's practice plan. You kind of find out about it at the last second, and so you got to kind of be prepared to just be like run in and run a drill that you may not know that you were responsible for running until 5 minutes before practice. But you just kind of have to have that sort of stuff prepared, and whether it's working with the scout teams and spending more time on the X's and O's, whether it's player development or the X's and O's of a scout. And it's all on top of all the stuff that was my full-time job before, which is all the operational stuff and the academic stuff and the compliance stuff. And so yeah, it's just more, but it's the stuff that you work towards and want to do. So no complaints here.
You talk about cutting your teeth. The SEC is such a wheelhouse right now. What a buzzsaw. You mentioned you think it's the best conference in America, and it arguably, it has an argument. You're absolutely right, Burgo. I mean, for those that don't know, I know but the SEC standings right now are just absolutely insane. I mean, aren't they? Like, you look at the bottom of the SEC right now with Mizzou and Vandy, and Vandy's 5-11, but Mizzou's 8-8. Outside of that, every other team is above 500. You got Texas A&M, who's third or fourth from last. They just beat Kentucky. You got South Carolina, Georgia, who I don't think many folks tabbed would have a successful season, yet here they are. It is top to, like, there's no easy games. Burgo, I was talking about the SEC last week. Is this the toughest you've seen this conference in your time there?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think of going back to SEC Media Day. I want to say it was Coach Mike White from Georgia, that talked about the fact that in the media poll, Georgia was picked 11th. I want to say, but to start the year they were 52nd in KenPom. So it's like you're talking about the 11th team is preseason 52nd in KenPom. Like, that's going to make for a tough night every single night. I mean, I think I feel like it does get said every year that the SEC, it's the toughest the league's been, but I mean the quality of coaches and just the quality of talent and the resources that the SEC has, it just makes it for, you're going to have a tough night every single night, whether it's you're playing the number 1 team in the conference or the 14th team in the conference. The coaches are good, the players are good. This part of the country is generally really athletic, so things are going to be hard to run and hard to stop. And yeah, it's not easy, but it makes being successful in it that much sweeter if we can continue to, win the games we have a chance to win.
And these are real tests for you too, right? I mean, right now I'm looking at it. I'm going to keep gassing you guys up. You're beating the hell out of teams. But as you continue to go forward in conference play, these are real tests night in and night out. Do you feel that this year, more so than other years, this is going to prepare you for a tournament run, or getting to the tournament at least, or maybe even just the SEC tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I think every year prepares you for those runs. You know what I'm saying? I honestly, for me, I think the runs in the NCAA tournament just come down at the end of the day to a little bit of luck and matchups. But yeah, I mean, I think since I've been here, the coaching and the quality of play has been so good that you're prepared to see. You've seen just about everything in the course of your regular season, that there's not going to be anything too unique by the time you get to the tournament.
So I mentioned you've been on a Final Four team. Let's pivot now to this year's team. Compare and contrast. Give me some similarities, some differences that you may have seen between this current team, which is still evolving. We're only here in January, as opposed to that Final Four team. Do you see any similarities and other differences?
I mean, I think the number one similarity that I see is the depth. I think our depth is our greatest strength this year. The fact that we can play 10, 11 guys, and not really drop off. I think that's been a major factor in our success. And it's not just been one guy every night. It's been the collective of guys. And if somebody has a down night, somebody else is having one of their best nights, and we just kind of feed off of that. And the guys are so appreciative of each other that they're all their biggest cheerleaders. Whether it's whoever starts at point guard and backs up at point guard, they're cheering their heads off for the other person on the bench when they're not in the game. And I think that is very similar to what the Final Four. We played 11 guys in that run to Minneapolis. We were playing 3 centers, and then we were 2 deep at every other position. And so I'd say that is the biggest similarity that I've seen. Now, while that team was an elite 3-point shooting team, and an elite shot blocking and forcing turnover team, the Final Four team, I think this team's strengths are a little bit different in the sense that this is the best, assist rate team that we've had since, Coach Pearl's been at Auburn. The other thing that, it's not necessarily we're not like a top 10 national, but this is the best defensive rebounding rate team that we've had since Coach Pearl's been at Auburn. So I think while those two stats aren't as flashy as, the Final Four teams 3 balls and turn people over and blocking shots, this team definitely has some significant strengths that are different than that team.
Assists and defensive rebounding is what you mentioned. What's the catalyst for that? What do you think the reasoning is for that? And it can be a multitude of reasons, but if you were to identify why you think you're sitting here in mid-January excelling in those 2 categories, what would you say?
Yeah, I think I would give a lot of credit to the guys first and foremost for buying in, but I think Coach Pearl really pushed the right buttons in the offseason. I think we recognized what we thought some of our weaknesses might be, and I think we worked really hard at those early. And we always say as coaches, like, what you work on is what you become really good at. And we really worked on sharing the ball this off season, and really worked on hockey assists, all that sort of stuff. And then we, as basic of a drill as it is, like, we did perimeter, like circle checkouts is what we call them, just about every day. And in the off season, you only get 4 hours of basketball a week, and so to spend 15 minutes each day, so let's say an hour of those 4 hours on defensive rebounding, I think is one of the reasons why at this point, now there's still a long year to go, and the SEC is, I want to say, the #1 offensive rebounding conference in the country. But at this point, that's part of the reason why we've had some success, as I think we spent time and focused on it and recognized it early.
The groundwork was laid is essentially what you were saying. And it was laid early. I think that's also very important, right? Groundwork wasn't necessarily laid in like September or August, right? You're going all the way back probably to June, July as well. So
Absolutely.
I think that's very interesting there, Burgo. Hey, do me a favor. Don't blush. You can if you want, but don't blush, because what I'm going to do now is read off some of the results of your last few games, because they are straight up beatdowns. All right. I'm going to go back to Indiana, where you beat them 104-76. This is essentially all the results after your last loss, which was App State. UNC Asheville, you beat 87-62. USC, you beat 91-75. Alabama State, 82-62. Chattanooga, 101-66. UPenn, I've been banging on the Ivy League drum, man. I love the Ivy League. 88-68, Auburn winners. Arkansas, as we enter conference play, 83-51. TAMU, who just beat Kentucky 66-55, and you just come off of a great win against LSU 93-78. These are staggering results, Burgo. Okay, as a neutral party, my question to you is, how do you avoid becoming complacent after seeing those results?
Yeah, I think we talk about it all the time. I think one of Coach Pearl's great quotes, and it's very true about our style of play, is what we do does not work without effort and energy. And so we have to find a way, whether we're home in front of the best, home court advantage in the country, or on the road where it's R12 against, 15 to 20,000, right? Like, we got to find a way to bring that effort and energy every single night. And we talk about it all the time. The fact that all of these ranked teams lose last week, we talk about that, and talk about why we think they might have. What were they excited to play an unranked team? And then, I think because of once again our depth, and because guys aren't necessarily playing 28, 30, 32, 35 minutes each night, I think that helps avoid the complacency too, because they're fresh enough to play really hard in the 20 minutes that they play on average, and that's their opportunity. So, they want to take advantage of it. And so I go back to the depth, and that's why I talked about being the greatest strength of this team is I think it does a lot more than just allows us to, win the bench scoring margin. I think it does a lot psychologically for our team as well.
It definitely does. And so let me make sure I gathered this properly. All right. What we do doesn't work without effort and energy. What you work on, you become good at. Are there any other quotes that I'm missing? Does Bruce plan on putting out like a quote book that I can buy on Amazon or anything?
Um, no quote books, but when you work for somebody for 8 years, you tend to kind of pick up one or two things. And so, he's, in my opinion, he's a Hall of Fame coach, and he's one of the best coaches in the country, if not the best coach in the country. And so, if I can try to take anything from him and pay attention to what he's saying, I think it tends to have some success and some truth to it.
Does that ever bleed into your personal life there, Burgo? I don't know if you're folding the clothes in properly or if you're cooking a meal or something. You're like, this meal is going to be as good if I don't give it all the effort and energy I have. Does that ever bleed into your personal life?
I wouldn't say quite like that. But you gotta practice what you preach. So maybe I need to a little bit more.
Let's take it all the way back now to game number 1. You only have 2 losses on the year. I highlighted App State. The other one was to Baylor, who is another tremendous team, a recent national champion, and is slowly but surely and quietly, in my eyes, rising up the ranks from another tremendous conference. I think when I said arguably the SEC is the best conference, the other guy in the Big 12, they might have something to say about that as well. Take us back to that night 1. What did you take from that Baylor game in the moment and now moving forward, and just talk a little bit about, as we sit here in mid-January, how much your team has grown from night 1?
Yeah, I mean, I think my original takeaway, because you up to that point we've only played a closed door scrimmage, right? Which you get a feel for your team, but it's not obviously the real thing because there's no crowd. And then you play an exhibition. We played an exhibition against Division II from in this state, and the guys kind of get the jitters of the crowd out of their system a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's not like you're playing. You're not playing Baylor. It's not quite that level. Although Auburn Montgomery, was a very good test for us. So going into that first game, while you're playing Baylor, that is it's a marquee matchup. I think we were the only game really on ESPN that night, that Tuesday night, because it was election night, and there honestly wasn't as much pressure in it because you're still trying to learn so much about your team, and kind of guarantee that it's going to be a quad 1 game. So if you win, it's great. If you lose, it doesn't really hurt you. You know what I'm saying? And so I went into that game, thinking we had a pretty good chance. And from my perspective, I thought we played really well for 30 minutes, 32 minutes. And then, but I also think we learned a lot about what could beat us. And we fouled way too much in that game. And while we like to play an aggressive style of defense, I think we were able to really point out some areas where there were some, in my opinion, some not super productive fouls, and how, we're going to we're going to foul enough throughout the course of the game. That's just how we play. So we don't sort of need these fouls that don't serve a purpose, I guess, if that makes sense. At the same time, what a first game for, Aden Holloway in that game. Janai Broom played really, really well. Denver Jones, who was making a leap from Conference USA up to, high major basketball. I think it gave our guys confidence in a lot of ways. Not that they're not a confident bunch anyways, but I think it gave our whole program confidence that, we belonged in a game like that. Would we have loved the opportunity to, go our way? Sure. But I think it I think it got people talking about us a little bit when we, didn't have a lot of preseason hype, and I think it made us learn a lot about ourselves.
I want to unpack that answer chronologically based on the responses you gave me here, Burgo. So first and foremost, you mentioned about that exhibition game that you did play. Do you as a coach feel, or would you like to see or have the opportunity? Let me rephrase that. Would you like to have the opportunity to schedule more preseason games leading up to the season? I'm not saying you'd schedule the cream of the crop, or maybe you would. I don't know. But would you like to have more of a preseason opportunity to get the kinks out before night one, or no?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know. I already think 31 regular season games. I mean, it is a grind. So I don't know that you necessarily want to play too many more. But I will say, I do believe they're talking about potentially changing some of the charity exhibition rules to where you can have exhibitions against Division Ones. I mean, I think the charity exhibitions that happen all over the country are awesome. We would have loved to have tried to be in one. We'd kind of already scheduled what we had, before that. But if the, I just think about like Purdue and Arkansas, and that's a preseason game, and the environment there was awesome, and so it, being in opportunities like that, like, Baylor really prepared us for the rest of the year. Whether, would we have liked to have the W on our schedule? For sure. But I think, we lost the battle and won the war from the growth in that standpoint. And so if we could get those opportunities that don't go against you, that'd be great. But maybe one or two more, but I don't think you got to go crazy, because like I said, 31 games plus postseason is a grind.
I also really want to commend Coach Pearl, the coaching staff, and also Coach Scott Drew, because Burgo, I'm going to be honest with you. Again, you're in the coach's seat. I'm in a fan seat. The first week or two of college basketball does not have many marquee matchups. All right. But when you get a Baylor and Auburn as the first game for their respective seasons, it's awesome, because again, we see these high power D1 teams going up against straight up inferior competition. It's nice. It's refreshing. And I'm thankful for the coaches like Pearl and Scott Drew that are like, you know what, let's schedule this super early and get together. Like, were you part of that scheduling conversation at all?
Yeah, so I one of my roles on the staff is our schedule. And so I work with Coach Pearl on that. But I think Garth Glissman is the new associate commissioner for SEC basketball in the conference. New this summer. This game had been scheduled before that, but he really recognizes a need for more high quality, matchups within the first week, the like more marquee matchups in that first week. And Coach Pearl will play anybody, anywhere, anytime. I mean, we went to Appalachian State, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, I was a part of that, and like I said, I think we'd love to try to do more of that. It's not always easy getting these high quality non-conference games just because of availability, and some of these conferences are 20 league games, or 20, some are going to go to 22 in the future. But I think like I said, there's still a long way to go, but I do think the benefits from playing that game way outweighed the loss. And so it's something that I don't know that we're going to be able to pull it off every year, but when we get the opportunity, we're not going to run from it.
Man, the onus isn't on you only. It's not only your responsibility, Auburn.
Right.
It's everyone else's responsibility to step up to the plate. But Burgo, that's really cool that you got to have an influence and a say in the decision-making process as it relates to scheduling, because in college athletics, that is important. Like, it's fun, obviously, but when you get to late February and March, people do look at how well you scheduled, and then of course the results. But what was that experience like for you? And take us into the nitty-gritty, Burgo, when you're like, I want to play these guys at this venue or whatever it is. Like, do you just pick up the phone, call the coach, and be like, hey, you want to do this? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so some of it's like that. A lot of times where you see these neutral site games, and we happen to play in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which we got a lot of pushback for. But that venue has been awesome for college basketball. Baylor and Gonzaga had played there in a similar matchup the year prior, and we kind of the backstory on how we got to that point was we were working with a third party company that organizes some of these games and promotes some of these games and handles the event management of these games. And we were working with that company on um, a 2-year opening night, sort of rotating with 4 teams, and for whatever reason could never really get a fourth team to be a part of it. Baylor happened to be another team that was in that conversation. I won't say the other team that was in there, but it kind of fell apart, and so we were still looking, because in trying to schedule, you're trying to schedule a certain amount of quality games, for your net, for your resume, all that sort of stuff. We were missing, you know, one that slot that we had planned on having, and so using the company that was supposed to put on the original event, they had some connections. It's the same company that runs Battle for Atlantis. And so when COVID happened, they played Battle for Atlantis in Sioux Falls. So they had a really good relationship with that building, essentially, or whoever runs it, not the building itself. But and so they were able to kind of it wasn't super last minute, but they were able to kind of throw it together, late in the process. And Baylor was looking for the same thing that we were, and so we were in.
I spoke with Rocco Miller in the off season, and he took me behind the curtains of scheduling and things like that. So that's really interesting. I think that's really cool that you're able to do that now as an assistant coach, and that's part of your role and responsibility as well. Burgo, I want to talk a little bit also about Denver Jones, who you mentioned. What I'm seeing, there's kind of like this evolution of transfers, right? So when we grew up watching college basketball, if you transferred, the reality of the situation is a lot of people were like, whoa, that's big time news. And I think some people even saw it as a red flag in the sense that, can he not hack it or cut it for this particular coach? Are there academic issues? We've grown to the point now where we've seen transfers right in our adulthood, but the impact transfers that we used to see, I'm talking maybe like when we were in our early 20s, are folks coming from power programs to another power program. And it's like, this guy came over from the SEC into the Big 12. This guy came from the ACC over to the Pac 12, yada, yada. But you mentioned Denver Jones, and there's another dude in your conference, Dalton Connect. And there's tons of players throughout the country that have made the jump, not only transferring, but transferring from mid-major conferences to the big dogs, and they are excelling. Can you talk a little bit about how that has maybe changed your view or your approach in terms of getting transfers? Because it seems as if it's not just coaching staffs looking for good players in other good teams or conferences. The whole table is open.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the super positive things about, the transfer portal, and now that the rules change where people can transfer as many times as they want, is it takes a person like Denver Jones, who probably was under recruited out of high school, did a year of prep, did a year of JUCO, and really worked to develop his game, develop his body, and become, a 20-point per game scorer in Conference USA, which, last year was obviously a terrific conference, FAU, North Texas, everybody in that conference, right? And so he put himself in position through hard work and perseverance. And, he's from the state of Alabama originally. And so, an opportunity to go play at one of the big state schools, that's awesome. Same thing with like Chaney Johnson, who's on our team. He's our reserve foreman. He was 6'2", 6'1" out of high school. He's now 6'7", and grew, 6 inches in his first 2 years of college at University of Alabama, Huntsville, which is a Division II school. And we knew about Chaney because we played against him in an exhibition last year. And so he went in the transfer portal, we knew, he was good enough, and we'd seen him in person. And then also a guy like Chad Baker-Mazara on our team, who, started at Duquesne, had a lot of success at San Diego State, which, you consider not necessarily mid-major, but obviously, as they went into the Final Four, did a year at JUCO, and now is at SEC level basketball. And so I think that's, it's a super positive thing, for the game, is some of these transfer ups, if you want to call it that. And so, yeah, it's a lot of fun in the off season trying to find some of these maybe under recruited guys that aren't just, aren't, like you said, aren't these marquee transfers that are coming from other high majors. And seeing how they, watching their tape and seeing how they fit in your system. I look forward to it every offseason. Now it's a grind, like everything that we do in this business is, because you're trying to evaluate a lot of people, in a short period of time, and visits and everything happens really quickly. Like we always joke that the transfer portal, like one day in the transfer portal is like 2 weeks in like a high school recruitment. It's just like stuff happens so fast. But like you said, like it definitely, it's definitely a change that, in my opinion, from those examples is positive.
No, it's so much fun. I do love seeing these names that folks probably weren't familiar with. I mean, you and I are probably familiar with them because we're in the weeds. No, I'm not in the weeds as much as you, but I got a good understanding of what's going on in some of the mid-major conferences. And it's like a guy like Zion Pullen. I don't think anyone knew about Zion Pullen over on the West Coast, right? Now he's gotten his shot at Florida and he's excelling. I mentioned Dalton Connect. There's a bunch of others that have been a lot of fun to see. And I actually saw a Twitter exchange, Burgo, from Frank Martin replying to a fan, because Devin Carter is having an amazing year close to home for both of us up in Providence, right?
Mhm.
He could be Big East Player of the Year over at Providence, but he got his start at South Carolina, and some fan was like, how did these big name schools miss out on Devin Carter? Or, how did he only land at South Carolina? And when I talk about the competitive balance, it's like, all these schools, even in your conference, all these schools want these players. And obviously Devin Carter came out of high school, transferred out to the Big East, and that's high major to high major. But it just goes to show you that the competitiveness of getting your paws on these players at an all-time high.
No doubt. And that's what hearing some of the stories of how much these kids in the transfer portal are called the day that they go in. I mean, like Denver's like, I had to shut my phone off after two, like I just, you just can't handle all of that incoming, recruitment at a certain point. So that's why it's important to be, and we have a whole process for monitoring and getting on guys quickly. And but you got to be quick, because at the end of the day, there's so much demand for for these transfers that they can get tired of the recruitment pretty quickly.
I believe it. I believe it. Hey, so let's get back to this year's team, Burgo. Your offense is humming. Okay. So you mentioned the defensive rebounding. That's great. The assists, which contribute to such a prolific offense. I want to get into the sexy aspect of this Auburn team. And again, that's the offense. I think you guys are averaging like 84 points this year. You're sharing the wealth. You're fast. It's a lot of fun to watch. Was that also a key part of the offseason regimen for Bruce Pearl? I mean, what are you contributing this offensive surge to?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it has a lot to do with our personnel. I think the way that we like to play offensively, this group is really suited for. And I think part of that too is it starts with the defense too. I mean, which we've been doing such a good job of, like I said, limiting teams to one shot so that we can get out and run. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to play fast and score, get out and run and transition. And so the combination of rebounding and turning people over to be able to get out and run and play free. That's what we like to do here. And then, like we said, with the passing and everything, it's just, there's everybody's very unselfish. Everyone wants to see everybody else succeed. Nobody's necessarily worried about their individual numbers. And so, that makes for, in my opinion, that makes for a really beautiful style of basketball. And so, you've seen that in our offense throughout this year.
What I try and identify, Burgo, is kind of this dichotomy, right, of a team over the course of 6 to 7 years where they have values and principles that carry over year to year to year, but they also adapt and maybe change style of play based on personnel, which you mentioned a little bit. Is there, I don't know, like visualize this with me. You've been in Auburn's camp for a while now. Is there, can you mention something that has carried over year to year to year, that was there before you got there and will be there long after you got there, just an ideology or just a mantra? Is there something that's been consistent and will always be consistent? And then are there items that change year to year? Do you see kind of what I'm driving at here?
Sure. I mean, um, not necessarily a mantra, but I don't know. For whatever reason, I went to style play when you were asking that question. And so, one thing that's going to happen on Coach Pro's team every single year is we're going to press, right? We're going to press. We may press a little differently from year to year, just because personnel wise, we may put certain guys in certain spots, but we're going to press and guard 94 feet. And when we say press, like, you'll see the traditional full court presses, but we like to consider that we're pressing in the half court as well. And that's something that he's done his entire career. So that'll never change. Now, there may be certain strategical tweaks based on people's ability to do certain things, but that's always going to happen. From the offensive side of the ball, there's always going to be some flex in the mix. Coach Pearl worked for Tom Davis. That's his mentor. He ran the flex for forever. And so, while we have incorporated some more, 5-out, similar to what they're doing in the NBA and over in Europe, you're always going to see us flex cut at least 5 to 6 times a game, and that's something that's never going to change.
I love that. I'll be looking for that in years from now when you guys are still running some of the same concepts there. All right, let's talk a little now personnel. All right, individual performances and what you've seen in some of these players. I'm going to start with Aden Holloway. Okay. You mentioned him in the Baylor game. It was a bit of a coming out party for him. He was tremendous and he's been tremendous, but in your eyes, Burgo, where have you seen the growth with a young Aden Holloway from that night all the way up here until mid-January? So where have you seen the growth there? And then what's next for him this season?
Yeah. I mean, I think, Aden has been a really good fit in our system with the way that he just plays with such great pace. Not one to ever want to walk the ball up the floor. And throws it ahead all the time to those 2s and 3s in our system. Running the break. He's such a threat from 3 and from deep that he just kind of opens the floor up for everybody else because you have to guard him. And I think the one thing that Aden would say about himself, and if you watched Aden in high school, is he's always been considered better offensively than defensively. And the thing that's most impressed me about Aden is while he'll still make some mistakes here and there, he's working so hard on the defensive end to be as smart as he possibly can be. Like his off ball positioning has been fantastic. His one-on-one closeouts are much improved, and he checks out 9 out of 10 times, which we would love it to be 10 out of 10 times, but it's something that he probably wasn't asked to do as much because of just his ability to score in high school and in AAU, and he's really bought into that. So where he goes from here is just doing everything with a little bit more efficiency, and just shooting at a higher clip. But every time he shoots it, I think it's going in. And so he's broken all the records in all of our shooting drills this whole summer. And so I think there's going to be a point in the year, because I wouldn't necessarily say he's on a lull right now, but there's going to be a point on the year where he's going to be scorching hot, and like that Baylor game, you got to watch out for that.
Man, that's good for me to know, as if I didn't already know that. But when I'm picking my bracket, I do look for the teams with the guys that are like, can this guy catch fire and go for 8 to 10 straight points in about a 2-minute span? Aden Holloway seems to be a guy that can do that. Not to say that he's going to get out of the motion of the offense, things of that nature, but there's some flamethrowers out there, and that's who I'm looking at. When I pick teams to advance. So what about KD Johnson? Okay, the heartbeat almost of the Auburn Tigers, and I think personally, I have a good feeling of what I can expect and what kind of ball player KD Johnson is on the court. What I want to get insight into, Burgo, that I'm hoping you can help me out with, is how have you seen him mature as a leader off the court? What are some of the things that aren't showing up in the box score this year, game by game, or over the past few years? Take us behind the curtain to KD Johnson's maturation process.
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of the reason you see KD up until this point having, some of his best numbers of his career, not necessarily saying scoring highs or anything like that, but just how efficient he's been and how productive he's been. I think he's just tried to set the tone from a defensive standpoint. I think coach all offseason challenged him to be one of the best defensive guards in the league. And I think he's bought into that. And we practiced before this too, and it just comes to mind that he just makes everything hard to run for the our scout team and our opponents when he is engaged. And I think the biggest part of his maturation is more consistently engaged. And what the factor is for that, I don't 100% know. I think he really has bought into this group. I think he loves this locker room. I think he's really close with everybody, and so he's not just doing it for himself, but he's doing it for them. And that, I think that's part of the reason why you see his assist numbers are up, and he's shooting a good he's shooting a better percentage from two than he has ever before, and it's because he is doing things for not just himself but for others, and like you said, trying to be a leader by setting a defensive tone.
Is there anyone more intense than him in the locker room? I can't imagine it.
Maybe Coach Pearl, but I don't know. It's close. It's a coin flip.
There's no other player that
no, not a player. No. But maybe Coach Pearl has. They're close because Coach does it for 40 minutes. Katie does it for about 20. So that's. But I think I don't know. It's close.
That's good. Chad Baker-Mazara, you mentioned him earlier in the episode. You're basically taking my notes here, Burgo. Well done. Coach Pearl was on the Rothstein podcast, and he had mentioned that Chad Baker-Mazara is essentially the X factor, right? Or the wild card is, I think, what Rothstein said, or maybe Coach Pearl said that. What makes him that X factor or wild card?
Yeah, I mean, I think he just he just gives us a different dimension. I think that's another great thing about our depth is not all pieces are the same. And so he just gives us a great scoring and playmaking dimension, off the bench. We've never really, since I've been here, we've never really had like a big long wing like him. And his efficiency offensively is just like off the charts. And that's been such as much as anything, that's been another reason why like our team's offensive efficiency numbers, because it's good to have like a secondary ball handler that is making the right play. I think I know he did a few games ago, but I think he still might lead us in assist to turnover ratio. It was something crazy. It was like 4-1. He just has incredible feel. I know his dad's a coach, and I don't know exactly who he would credit he learned the game from, but he just is constantly in the right spots, constantly makes what you'd call the right play, cuts when it's appropriate, fades when it's appropriate, circles back when it's appropriate. He just has great feel for for the game and things that you can't teach. And if he can keep that consistency up, that's why I think X factor, wild card, whatever term you want to say, like that's part of the reason that we've had some success.
Before we get you out of here on a couple fun questions, got Ole Miss coming up here soon. I know who's next. You got
Vanderbilt on Wednesday night.
Vandy, okay, and then Ole Miss. Ole Miss, I was mentioning some of the surprises in the SEC, like Georgia and South Carolina, etc. Back when they hired Chris Beard, I said Chris Beard and Rick Pitino are the two coaches that are immediate impact guys. Like right away, I think they're going to have a winning program. They're ranked right now. They're on track to getting to the NCAA tournament. That Ole Miss game and that Ole Miss team, have you done any studying of them at all this season? Have you been able to catch anything from them?
I've watched them a few times. I wouldn't say like in-depth studying, like, Stephen Pearl on our staff will have that scout, so he's been more in depth. But I've watched them without great attention to detail.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right, let's get you out of here, Burgo. On a couple quick fun ones. Nick Saban retired last week. Did you roll Toomer's Corner along with some of the other students?
I didn't roll Toomer's Corner, but I appreciated that. And if if I didn't have anything else going on, I would have been out there with them. I think that it's significant enough to roll the trees for sure.
And then, hey, your acting chops, man. All right, so you've grown obviously as a coach, but man, you are a natural in front of the camera. You guys have these like spoof on This Is Sports Center, right? You guys do This Is Auburn. I saw one where basically the student section is following Coach Pearl everywhere. You're killing it, Burgo. Tell us a little bit about, literally take us behind the scenes of some of these commercials and how you're cast and how comfortable you are in front of the camera.
Yeah. So Stephen Leonard, we hired Stephen Leonard away from the University of Virginia last summer. He's now our director of creative content. We have kind of seen everybody across college basketball kind of developing that, but not everybody, but people are starting to develop that position on their staffs as a way, because there's so much graphic demand and photo shoots and social media presence required for these college basketball programs. If you want to stay relevant amongst these high schoolers and these transfers and just kind of stay relevant, nationally. And so Stephen Leonard, he is very funny. He is very creative. He's the brains behind, all of the scripts and the way they're shot and all that sort of stuff. I'm just excited whenever I'm asked to be in one. I was in a musical in the 5th grade in Westford. So I attribute, I forget the name of the company that put that musical on, but I give them all of the props for my acting prowess. And then,
What was the play?
I was in, I was in Oliver in 5th grade. We don't have to go into those details, but yeah. And then, so Steven makes all the creative decisions and then I just complain every time I'm not in one. So that's how I keep popping up.
I love it. Any content creative? I know it's up to Steven, but any suggestions that you may have had incorporating Tumor's Corner or incorporating, I don't know, you got the student section. What else? Like, you guys ever thought about bringing a real life tiger in? What do you think?
I leave that all to him. I mean, we literally hired him to be creative and that's what he does best. I'm more the boring, just like X's and O's strategy, operations compliance guy. So.
Not boring at all. Burgo, this has been amazing. Great catching up with you. Best of luck the rest of the season. And congratulations again on this new role that you've been excelling in this season. Awesome work, man. Keep it up.
Appreciate it, man. Always enjoy, hopping on, and I'm glad to see you guys are doing big things and having big guests, and it's fun to follow along. So
You're the man, Burgo. Thank you.